Glenn Greenwald has watched all of this. He's an independent journalist. His work is on Substack, among other places. He joins us tonight. Glenn, thanks so much for coming on. So every mass shooting, of course, is a tragedy. Every murder is a tragedy. Every death is a tragedy. But how chilling was it to watch the immediate mobilization of a political party using the pretext of a killing to make baldly political points? I don't think I've ever seen anything like it.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things a healthy society does is unites whenever there's a horrific act that violates the values of all decent people. We saw that in the wake of 9/11, for example, for a few days or a couple of weeks. But unfortunately, another path can be taken, and often is, by political leaders. You might remember in 1995 when there was that hideous attack on the federal courthouse in Oklahoma City. The Clinton administration immediately seized on that to say we need a backdoor access to be able to control the internet where this information is spreading. After 9/11, with the war on terror, right-wing leaders like Newt Gingrich explicitly argued we need to amend the First Amendment to control the ability of Muslim radicals to be able to spread their hateful message. So often these crises are seized upon by leaders to demand more power. This idea that, for example, the First Amendment doesn't protect hate speech is completely false. The Supreme Court has said the opposite. But I also think that what's critical to note is that every political ideology, every last one, has psychopaths or extremists who carry out violence in the name of that ideology, and to try and blame your political opponents or to ascribe fault or guilt to people who share that ideology is a completely morally atrocious act, because you're exploiting the corpses and not expressing sadness over them.
Shouldn't there at least be a pause? I mean, I think all of us can learn lessons from tragedy. Why do people do what they do? How did this happen? I think we should know. I think that of all tragedies. But it seems like the period where we sort of pause and let the sadness sink in, and remember we're all united by our ultimate deaths, which we are, makes us equal as people, that time has evaporated. It's like instant now. And I wonder what that says about our leaders.
I was really amazed at not just the rapidity with which this coordinated messaging campaign emerged to try and blame this network and political opponents, but also just how unanimous it was, particularly since the only thing that was known about the person who carried out this massacre was a 181-page, very densely written manifesto that, as you said, had a wide range of kind of unrelated ideas. He called himself a left-wing authoritarian on the one hand, a fascist on the other hand. There was no way these people could have taken the time to have read that, to have learned about the mental health of this person. They didn't care what the facts were. They saw an opportunity in those corpses laying on the ground, and the opportunity was political and exploitative, and they seized on it together and quickly in a way that made clear that their concern or sadness for the victims was a complete pretense. They instantly weaponized it before anything was known.
Anyone who shows no reverence in the face of death should make us nervous. It's a sign of ruthlessness and bad character. I think that anyone's death, any place, I believe that. I know you do too. Glenn Greenwald, thank you so much.
Thanks, Tucker.
So as the usual activists who use the murders in Buffalo over a weekend to attack their political opponents, including, as you just heard, this channel. On Twitter, Mike Davis at the Article 3 Project pointed out that it's, quote, disgusting and insane to exploit this tragedy. Twitter suspended him for pointing that out. So someone who said, actually, we shouldn't jump to quick and dirty partisan conclusions from a mass murder was banned from saying that by Twitter. So this tells you a lot. Let that sink in for a moment. In the meantime, we want to bring on Harmeet Dillon, who is the country's premier civil rights attorney, CEO of the Center for American Liberty. And we're happy to have her join us now. Harmeet, thanks so much for coming on. So it seems to me, at base, not even a political point, but a humane point, to say, hold on a second, we don't know everything. Let's just bow before the sadness of this moment and not jump to politically convenient conclusions from it, try to take other people's rights away on the basis of it. And that's now hate speech? Tell me how this works.
Well, this is exactly how Twitter has been working, as well as the other social media companies for the last few years. We've now learned that the government has a lot to do with this. But in short, this is a microcosm. Something horrible happens. Politically powerful voices with blue checks and a lot of followers immediately began spreading talking points. Those are propagated and spread further by these algorithms at the tech companies, which are staffed by these woke, young people put out there. And then you have this story that has nothing to do with what actually happened. It's like a digital game of telephone, the game we used to play when we were kids. And so here, Mike Davis simply pointed out that before we rush to judgment, let's look at a few things that this person actually said. He took a couple of screenshots and he put them out there of the shooter's own words, which are very different than the narrative that the Biden administration and their lackeys in the media have been pushing. And he got suspended from Twitter for supposedly, it's unclear. They didn't even explain why. We assume that it's because of this tweet. Now, Mike is very well connected. He's clerked on the Supreme Court. He has a lot of allies in Washington, and a lot of people complained about this over the last few hours, and Twitter took notice of those powerful people talking back. And they unsuspended him today, saying that it was a mistake and an error. But thousands of people every day are taken down from social media for doing exactly what Mike did, which is saying truthful or thoughtful things that are not in the narrative that the left is trying to push. And their voices are silenced, sometimes permanently. So this is what's wrong with social media. Users have no rights. Mike had no way of knowing that what he put out there was going to get him suspended and not able to speak on this important topic. And this really needs to change, Tucker. There's so many things wrong with this picture that really limit our speech. And the end result, Tucker, is to make people like you and me think twice before we say truthful things on social media for fear of not being able to say the next truthful thing. And that's not healthy.
Well, it's so unhealthy, and by the way, it makes people paranoid and afraid, and it gives rise to conspiracy theories because clamping down on speech always does that. Why not let people speak? And the consenting adults who choose our leaders in this, quote, democracy can decide for themselves who's right on the basis of whatever facts are presented. I mean, it seems counterproductive. If you want to make people less crazy, if you want to lower the temperature, if you want to make the country more stable, you don't crack down on speech. That's the last thing you do, correct?
Absolutely. And the antidote to speech that you don't like is more speech, not silencing it. Glenn was exactly right. This has been done by the left and by the right. The Patriot Act is one of the big mistakes of my lifetime by our government. But you have people even on the, I wouldn't even call her on the right. Liz Cheney came out today and put out a very divisive statement blaming House leadership for white supremacy, anti-Semitism, and so on. I mean, really get a hold of yourself. That's really not what happened here in this circumstance. And crazy people do crazy things. And the mental health failure in this situation is going unexamined because that is not the narrative that the left wants to push. And the left is in control of the narrative that we get to see. And again, nothing wrong with hearing different viewpoints. It doesn't kill me to hear different viewpoints. Project Veritas has a video out today showing that exactly is what is happening is that Twitter employees acknowledge that the left is intolerant of different viewpoints. The right is happy to hear different viewpoints. And so guess what? If you want the left on your platform, you have to silence the right. Again, I hope that we have some changes at Twitter and other big social media because it can be a very powerful tool to be able to hear and learn more about things you didn't know. And maybe you might change your mind about something if you're able to hear a different viewpoint.
I agree with that. And I'm sad to hear that about Liz Cheney, a smart person who's very troubled and motivated by hate in a way that's disfiguring her, I would say. Sad. Harmeet Dillon, great to see you tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
This idea that, for example, the First Amendment doesn't protect hate speech is completely false. The Supreme Court has said the opposite. This idea that, for example, the First Amendment doesn't protect hate speech is completely false. This idea that, for example, the First Amendment doesn't protect hate speech is completely false. This idea that, for example, the First Amendment doesn't protect hate speech is completely false.